But please help me welcome Professor Tsang.
Well, thank you very much, Christine. It's a great pleasure to be here and to meet you all and to talk about something which, to me, is very close. On the issue of China and Chineseness, you will look at me and you will say, is the speaker Chinese or is he not? Simple, straightforward question. You have your answer. I'll back to you to ask you to rethink, because the answer to that question really is not as simple and straightforward as it seems or as it should be. Does somebody who looks like me, therefore, is Chinese or is not? I have a feeling about whether I am Chinese or not, and I can share that with you. But that's not what decides whether I'm Chinese or whether I'm not Chinese. It's also up to the Chinese government to say whether I am Chinese or whether I am not. And then there are other issues to be involved, and that's some of the things that I would like to be discussing with you. What I would like to do in the remaining of the 40 to 42 or 3 minutes, I would like to address the issue of how we should conceptualize identity, national identity, and also the meaning of Chinese. Then I will look at the issue of what does Chineseness mean to people living on the mainland of China, and also in places like Hong Kong or Taiwan, and indeed in the Chinese diaspora worldwide, before coming back eventually to address the normative issue of who should decide Chineseness of people who are open to be described as being Chinese or not. So in terms of the definitional side, conceptualization side of things, China is not different or should not be different from any other country. Chinese as a people shouldn't be different from any others. And in an important sense, it is not. National identity and nationalism, as Benedict Anderson has taught us, has always involved an element of myth creation. People don't just know they are Chinese or English or Welsh or British or whatever. It is a process of a nation forming, an identity that is forged with some myths being created. Here, as indeed it happens in China. Now, when we look at that, we also then have to address the issue of whether that sense of identity is something that can simply be decided by a government, leader, or a leadership, and then have that idea being educated and therefore shared? Or does that identity come through a process of consultation when people involved have a say in deciding who they are and whether they are part of that identity of that community being created and forged? I would have thought that for people in this room living in the United Kingdom, we would naturally choose the latter definition. That identity is something that is about us. We have a say. Well, in fact, we should have the biggest say in the matter. The government, ministers, elected representatives are our agents, and they should be acting on the kind of consensus or rough consensus that we as a people collectively can identify. That seems reasonable. That's not the way how it works in China. In China, when they talk about China and the feelings of the Chinese people, we're talking here not 60+ million people as we do in the United Kingdom. We are talking about 1 1.4 billion people. And there is one single view that can be clearly articulated, and that feeling can be heard by another country, another people saying something or doing something that 1.4 billion people collectively disagrees with, disapprove of, and felt annoyed, humiliated, angered. Now, how can that happen? That can happen only when you have a system whereby the idea of the country and of the national interest of that country exists in concentric circles, that you have on the outer circle China and the Chinese people, and within that outer circle you have a second circle, which is the Communist Party of China, that represents the state, that represents the people, that represents China. And within the Communist Party, in the last 10 years or so, it has a core. And needless to say, the core of the inner circle is the innermost circle of the concentric circles. And the core leader is none other than Supreme Leader Xi Jinping. So it's easy to have one view for 1.4 billion people. That is not necessarily quite the case if you go back 20 years, when the Communist Party was under collective leadership, when within that collective leadership, they could have closed-door, serious debates among themselves, while others are not being involved, but they actually did have that kind of debates. Now, there is no debate. And that's how China has changed under Xi Jinping. You can say it in the last 12 years, or you can say it basically in the last 7 years, because it took him about 5 years to consolidate his power. 2017 was when he really became the strongman of leader, when he could impose his will on the Communist Party and through the Communist Party on the people. So now we know. And in terms of Chineseness, when we talk about what makes a people Chinese, what do we actually mean, beyond what the Communist Party and Xi Jinping may think? When we look at a face, well, this one you can see, you would say, yeah, he looks pretty much Chinese to me. But what if I were a Tibetan or a Uyghur with Turkic features, rather than with Caucasic Oriental features? Would I be Chinese to you? Would I be equally Chinese to the Communist Party? What happens when a Chinese person looks like me walking into a hotel in a big city in China and asks for a hotel room without doing all the online booking beforehand? I will be given a room, perhaps charged at a higher rate than online price. But if I were a Uyghur person or a Tibetan person, I would have to show that I got police registration. Or I would have to be reported to the police that I am registering to stay in this hotel. Does he look as Chinese? Is he in reality as Chinese as a Han person is Chinese? In practice, in everyday life in China, in the way one is being treated by the government, which defines them as Chinese citizens, there's absolutely no question and no doubt that Chinese law and Chinese government policies define ethnic minorities in China as Chinese. But that's not how it actually works in practice, is it? And this is where things get very tricky. Some of you may well have heard in the last 5-7 years of some allegations being made of the Chinese government committing crimes against humanity, or in some cases, genocide in Xinjiang. Now, I'm not going to get into whether they were or they were not, but that level of accusations are incredibly serious. The Chinese government vehemently denies that, and they do so not simply because they lie. They do so because they themselves genuinely believe that's not what is happening in China today. From their perspective, what they are doing in places like Xinjiang, the kind of evidence that human rights activists in Europe and in America, in the democracies raised, like what some of them call concentration camps in Xinjiang. The Chinese here means the Chinese authorities, genuinely see them as educational facilities to bring these people up to become proper Chinese. Because Chineseness in China today, under the Chinese Communist Party, means that you need to be a Chinese patriot. If you are not a patriot, that's a different story. The Chinese term for a traitor in Chinese is Han Jian. Han is the character for the Han people. Jian is bad, betraying. So the Chinese term for a traitor is a traitor to the Han people. That's how people instinctively relate to it. That's the way how the Chinese government relate to it. And from their perspective, bringing these people up to the standard of being patriotic Chinese is forging one single people, is making them to rise up to the level that they should be. Now, whether the Uyghur people, individuals concerned, want to be or not, well, they don't know better, don't they? So we have to help them. That's the kind of mindset. It's not the kind of mindset that I would have thought people of British values particularly appreciate. We don't do that. We think people have a right to decide whether they are or they are not, whether they want to be one of us or whether they don't want to be. Immigrants, slightly different story. Immigrants are people who choose to want to be like us. But if you were born locally, you have no choice. But here, patriotic Chinese essentially means somebody who loves China, and China is defined overwhelmingly on the basis of the overwhelming majority of the ethnic groups in China, the Han, and its cultural and civilizational tradition, which incidentally means in the case of Uyghur people, they are completely embraced. They can be Uyghurs, they can be Muslims. They just have to, well, eat like us. And the main animal protein in China is pork. We all like a tipple. They just need to drink alcohol. We don't like people with too much facial hair. They just have to shave it off. They just have to treat their holy books the way we treat our books. Respect it in the same way, which is not quite the same way how they deal with the Quran. They just have to change. They can be like us. They have to embrace the leadership of the Communist Party. They have to honor the supreme leader of the Communist Party and of China. If they do all that, they are 100% Chinese. So you do have a bit of a problem in terms of China. And there is also the issue of Chinese law. The Chinese nationality law of 1980 is very clear in terms of who is a Chinese and who is not a Chinese. If you are born in China to at least one Chinese parent, you are Chinese. But having been born in China and being born Chinese, if you then settle overseas and by acquiring a foreign nationality through settlement, you lose your Chinese nationality and citizenship automatically. You don't have to apply for it. It happens just by you having acquired a foreign nationality. Now, that was introduced in 1980 in order to make sure that the Chinese diasporas worldwide would not be discriminated by their host countries, because there were, in the Maoist era, attempts by the Chinese government to support, actively engage with and support Chinese overseas to support the Communist Internationalist movement or Communist International Revolution, which were being seen as subversive to some host governments, and therefore unleashed massive anti-Chinese mass movements, as indeed it happened in Indonesia in the 1960s, with huge number of ethnic Chinese being murdered. So that law is clear, and it was introduced by government under the Communist Party of China. Now, Xi Jinping in the last 10 years is saying something different. If you have Chinese blood running through your veins, you are Chinese. And you should be good, patriotic Chinese. What did the law say? Matters not. The Supreme Leader has spoken. So what the Supreme Leader has said is now more important than what the law is. It is a Leninist political system where the party superintends and oversees everything in the state. So you get a bit of a problem here. And I'll come back to this when I address the issues of the overseas Chinese communities, the Chinese diaspora. Let me move on and talk about people of Hong Kong background, people who lived in Hong Kong, or people who are, if you could allow that, members of the Hong Kong diaspora, rather than simply see it as a subset of the Chinese diaspora. Are Hong Kong people Chinese, or are they not Chinese? By ethnic backgrounds, if you have in China itself over 90% of the population being overwhelmingly Han Chinese, of the Han ethnicity, you would have similar percentage in Hong Kong. They are overwhelmingly of the Han heritage. So they shouldn't be any different, should they? Well, except that they don't feel so Chinese. The overwhelming majority of people in Hong Kong would feel that they are Hong Kongers, or they are Hong Kong Chinese, or they are Chinese Hong Kongers. So there's different intensity of how they identify themselves as being Chinese, with a minority who would say that we are Chinese. So all of them exist in Hong Kong, but your multiple dual sense of identity people clearly exceed by a long way those who simply feel that they are Chinese. So are they Chinese or are they not Chinese? Does the one country, two system model that is supposed to apply to Hong Kong, that make Hong Kong a very special place, a special administrative region of the PRC, enjoying a high degree of autonomy, being allowed to maintain and sustain their way of life that was built on 153 years of British rule in Hong Kong, and therefore the meshing of Chinese traditions with British values and ways of life still make them Chinese, or does that not make them Chinese? Again, here, the Chinese government in terms of Chinese law is clear. From 1997 onwards, when the People's Republic of China assumed sovereignty over Hong Kong, people who lived in Hong Kong of Chinese descent are Chinese. That's the law. Whatever you think you are, that's what the law says you are. You don't have a choice on that matter. And now, in the last 5 years, that interpretation has been extended. Well, in fact, you are Chinese, even in the 153 years when Hong Kong was under British rule. Because Hong Kong was never a British colony. Hong Kong was never a British colony. The fact that it was, by law, by international recognition and acceptance, a British crown colony is neither here nor there. We, China, had made it very clear it didn't happen. It was just a period of illegal British occupation of Hong Kong that the Communist Party has put right. So, even if you had a British passport, you're Chinese. Well, not everybody in that situation are particularly comfortable and happy about that. Let me move on to the more tricky group of people. Taiwanese are Taiwanese Chinese. Again, the Chinese government position on Taiwan is very clear, very straightforward, very simple. Taiwan is and has always been Chinese since ancient times. And therefore, Taiwan must return to Chinese sovereignty, period. There's no if, there's no but. People in Taiwan, or pesky troublemakers like me, academics, sometimes have a bit of difficulties with that, because we have difficulties with people's sense of identity and we have difficulties in terms of history. Let me deal with history first. Well, I mean, if you want to come down to it, you can also address the issue of historical anthropological research, which would tell you that the indigenous people of Taiwan are not Chinese, except that it's being changed in China now. They are now saying that, in fact, they are all Chinese. Even the Indo-Pacific people have origins from China. So the scholarship can be rewritten. But if we are dealing with the kind of scholarship that we deal with outside of China, in the UK, in Europe, in America, in the democracies, then the history tells us something quite different, which is that the empire on the Chinese mainland did not exercise jurisdiction over Taiwan and did not claim Taiwan as within its jurisdiction until the 17th century, the late 17th century. Before that, it simply didn't happen. And I use the term the empire on the mainland of China rather than simple construction of the Chinese empire. Because the Chinese empire is a common usage term that we have put a 20th century construction back into an earlier era, which often creates more confusions than clarity. If you look at Chinese history, there wasn't a sense of a Chinese identity until the Republic of China was proclaimed and put in place in 1912. Before that, China, such as it was the Qing Empire. Now, the Qing Empire is the official title. In reality, the Qing were the Manchu Empire. And the Manchus were not Chinese when they conquered China proper. They were foreign invaders. The popular Western image of Fu Manchu with the funny head and the long pigtail, they were foreign dressed. They were not Chinese traditional costumes. And in the early stage of the Qing Manchu imperial rule, by the order of the Qing Manchu emperor, to show subjugation and acceptance of Manchu rule, Han Chinese people will have to shave their forehead and tie their hair into a pigtail like the Manchus do. Or if they refuse to do so, then they don't have a problem of dealing with their hair because they will have their heads chopped off. Now, are those therefore Manchu Empire Chinese, or was it not Chinese? When China proper, which was the previous pre-Manchu dynasty known as the Ming dynasty, which was a Han people empire, was being turned into a Manchu colony, and in the 1660s, when the pirate leader of Taiwan with both Han Chinese and Japanese heritage attacked the Qing Empire, the Manchu Empire, and then caused the Manchu Empire to return and conquer them and make them into another colony of the Manchu Empire. So these being fellow colonies make them part of the same or not. So there is a legitimate question that historians can debate almost endlessly whether before the Qing Empire, before the Qing Empire, there wasn't really not much to debate because the Mings didn't claim Taiwan as part of their empire. It's only in the Qing Empire that it was done so. And then the Qings ceded Taiwan to Japan after it fought a war with Japan in 1894 to 95 over control over Korea. When the Manchu Empire was defeated, they ceded Taiwan to Japan and essentially accepted that loss. And it was also something which was generally accepted by the Republic of China, which replaced the Manchu Empire. So historically, you have a problem of how long Chinese had ruled Taiwan at all. What we do know for sure is that the People's Republic of China, created by the Communist Party since 1949, had exercised jurisdiction over Taiwan for 0 seconds. It never has. So to say that we are claiming it back, you can see why some people are having some difficulties with that. And you also have some historical facts which are mostly forgotten and being, in fact, suppressed. Fun fact, which organization do you think historically was the strongest advocate for an independent Taiwan? Have a wild guess. Portugal, they had a reasons to, but it wasn't them. Good try, thank you. First prize goes to anybody who says the Chinese Communist Party. From the 1920s until the 1940s, until the Cairo Conference, November 1943 to be precise, the Communist Party of China was the strongest advocate for an independent Taiwan. You can find it in Red Star over China when Edgar Snow interviewed Chairman Mao in Yan'an, and Chairman Mao said that to him, go back to the library, don't go and buy your latest Penguin edition, but go back to the library, found the first edition, the original edition, is black and white there. Or you want stronger evidence, go and look up the Moscow's archives on the Sixth Party Congress of the Communist Party of China, which was held in Moscow, where it officially registered the formal resolution that the Communist Party of China supported independency for Taiwan, as it did with Korea, which was also a Japanese colony, because they saw Taiwan in the same light as the Koreans. And the one thing that changed Taiwan's status is something called the Cairo Declaration, a result of a wartime conference held in Cairo in November 1943, the only major international conference during the wartime among the airline leaders to which Chiang Kai-shek was invited. And at that conference, remember, it's November 1943. D-Day was planned for early part of 1944. Chiang Kai-shek asked Roosevelt and Churchill for a massive amphibian assault in Burma to reopen the Burma Road so that airline supplies could be delivered to China to sustain the war effort in the Pacific and the Far East. And you could see what Mr. Churchill had to say about that. And for that matter, even Mr. Roosevelt was not keen. His priority was Europe, was not Japan. They couldn't promise, deliver anything that Chiang Kai-shek asked for. And then they asked Chiang Kai-shek, so what do you want? Chiang Kai-shek say, how about Taiwan? Japanese colony. Deal, you can have it. At the end of the war, by the time we want, have Taiwan. And that was the basis of the Cairo Declaration, which effectively was a press communique of the airline leaders. It had no legal standing, but that is being cited as the basis, the international agreements that agrees to return Taiwan to China. Now, at the end of the war, what actually happened? At the end of the war, when Japan surrendered in August 1945, the Allied powers set up something called the Supreme Commander for Allied Powers in the Pacific, under one American general called Douglas MacArthur. And General Order Number 1 of MacArthur was to order forces, the Allied forces of China under the command of the Supreme Commander of the Allied powers to take occupation of Taiwan. So Taiwan was under military occupation of the Allied powers executed by Chinese forces of the Allied powers. The status of Taiwan under international law would only be decided and could only be decided at a peace conference. So until the peace conference, which was the San Francisco Peace Conference of 1951, Taiwan remained a territory of the Imperial Japanese Empire, temporarily under the military administration of the Allied powers executed by forces under Chiang Kai-shek's command. That's its legal status. Then by the time we get to 1951, there was a bit of a problem, because by which time the People's Republic of China had been created in China 2 years earlier, after 4 years of Chinese Civil War, Chiang Kai-shek had been driven out of the mainland of China and taken refuge in Taiwan itself. And the United Kingdom had recognized the PRC in January 1950. The United States continued to recognize Chiang Kai-shek's government as the Republic of China. And the UK and the US couldn't agree which was China, the Republic of China or the People's Republic of China. Because under American law, ROC, the Republic of China, was China. Under British law, the People's Republic of China was China. And the two great allies decided we go and have a fudge, which is that at the San Francisco Peace Conference, there will be no Chinese representative, and there will be a separate peace conference between China and Japan, which would happen the following year in Taipei, and a peace treaty will be signed between the Republic of China and Japan, which would simply accept exactly the same terms as it would be that it was agreed in San Francisco in 1951. And that peace treaty simply says Japan renounces sovereignty over Taiwan, but did not hand it to the Republic of China or the People's Republic of China. The Republic of China under Chiang Kai-shek continued to stay in Taiwan and exercise jurisdiction over Taiwan ever since to today. This is where we are. And under British and American laws, therefore, Taiwan's status was effectively undetermined. But under the government in Taiwan, in Taipei, under Chiang Kai-shek, they will assume that the Republic of China had assumed sovereignty over Taiwan. And if you follow general international practice, that would be the case because it exercised under the Montevideo Convention of 1934, which defines what defines a country, independent country, that it meets all the criteria laid down. And by the 1990s, when Taiwan transited from the dictatorship of Chiang Kai-shek into a full-blown democracy, then it would have popular mandate reaffirmed. So there is a case for people in Taiwan to say that we are Taiwan, but we call ourselves the Republic of China, or we call ourselves the Republic of China on Taiwan. And you have overwhelming majority of people in Taiwan articulating that kind of sentiments. The latest survey in Taiwan, 2025, shows 62.9% of people in Taiwan identify themselves as Taiwanese. That's 62.9%. 30.5% identify themselves as Taiwanese and Chinese. 2.3% identify themselves as Chinese. That's the sense of identity. The question with Taiwan is, do people in Taiwan have a right to decide who they are, or does a neighbor, much bigger, more powerful, with common heritage, has a right to decide what these 23 million people in a democracy is or is not? Now, I'm aware that I'm so indulgent and not very good in timekeeping, so I'll run very quickly on the issue of the Chinese diaspora. In terms of the Chinese diaspora, the fundamental issue here is that the law is clear that they are not Chinese. And it is in the basic interest of members of the Chinese diaspora to be able to say who they are. You're born in the UK, you are British. You have chosen consciously, particularly as an adult, to become a British citizen. You have done so by choice. You are British. If you are not, there is a bit of a problem. Why are you doing it at all? And why is that important? That's important because other people in the host country, I'm simply using UK as an example, it applies to all other countries, US, Canada, France, wherever, have a right to believe that your ethnicity doesn't matter, that you are one of us. Now, reality is, when you talk about the Chinese diaspora, you are talking about a very large mix of very, very different people. You're talking about people who are second, third, fourth generations born here. You're talking about long-standing immigrants. You are talking about recent immigrants. Some of them have come from the mainland of China, some of them come from Hong Kong, some of them come from Taiwan. They all have different sense of whether they are Chinese or not. And even among the people who have come from the mainland of China, some of them very clearly, very consciously, and very in their own way committed that they are a member, a citizen of their adopted country. That's why they have applied for British citizenship. And they are as British as anybody. They want to be. You have others at the other extreme who have registered or applied for and naturalized as British citizens, but are 100% supporting the Communist Party and Xi Jinping. They exist. But can they have one single identity? Is it fair that we even ask them whether they are of the same identity? Now, the Chinese nationality law addressed that problem by making it clear. You are being very silly if you remain loyal to the Communist Party and Xi Jinping, because you are not. You're not Chinese any longer. Until Xi Jinping comes along and says, no, 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 you are Chinese. You should be good Chinese. You should be a patriotic Chinese. You should be supporting us. You should be supporting me and everything I represent. If it gets a bit of a backlash, well, then you should realize that you think you are British. Do the British accept you as British? Mother China or Fatherland China is calling. Come and serve our best interests. Now, that is not what actually happens in how people respond to it. By putting it out there, it provides basis for the more right-wing extreme opinions in this country or elsewhere to create a backlash against ethnic Chinese members. And that's a serious problem. And I will end by simply putting to you a question. Because there is no simple, straightforward answers to who is Chinese, what makes a person Chinese, or what does not make a person Chinese. The question, therefore, is, should people have a right to choose? Or can this all simply be left to the decision of a government or a political party that makes itself perpetual government, or a supreme leader who imposes himself on the party and on the country? Why should people of Chinese ethnicity be any different from people of other ethnicities? Thank you very much.